Welcome to Bulls in the Barn podcast, where we advocate for Maryland agriculture one bullfight at a time. I'm one of your hosts, JT Albright, joined by Adam Miller, Matt Schnebley, and our special guest today, Steve Connelly from the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Steve, would like to start this episode with true or false question challenge to you with a little bit of knowledge.
Steve, true or false? The USDA census on Maryland agriculture in 2017 reported that Maryland ranks 10th in the nation for number of broilers sold at $307 million annually.
That would be true.
Nearly 48% of Maryland's agricultural products market value comes from poultry and eggs.
False. I think we're actually 7th in the nation.
That is correct.
Good answer, Steve. So to get started, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in agriculture, your job at the Maryland Department of Agriculture? You're the Deputy Secretary.
Yeah, sure.
So if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first off, I was very lucky to grow up on a dairy farm in Rising Sun, Maryland, an extended farm family. Which is, I think coming from production agriculture really helps you to, with your career and understanding how things work. I have a degree in agriculture and resource economics from the University of Maryland. While I was at the University of Maryland, I actually worked at Beltsville Ag Research Center at USDA, learned a little bit about research, but also how to handle a manure scraper and feed bags. My first real job out of college, though, was I worked at Maryland Farm Bureau as a field man as well as assistant director of government relations. I learned an awful lot at Farm Bureau. The most important thing is really learning the people that are involved in the ag leadership across the state. It's been invaluable. My experience I learned early on at Maryland Farm Bureau. Then I went on to work at the Maryland Department of Agriculture as their Director of Government Relations. That Farm Bureau time was invaluable. Learned the process of the legislature and got to meet a lot of the decision makers, and it really was helpful. And after that, after working at MDA for 8 years, I took the position as Executive Director of the Maryland Ag Education Foundation. We had a lot of success there in promoting agriculture literacy and to actually put the foundation on pretty firm financial footing by getting the ag tag passed, getting a home headquarters building built, as well as some other funding sources. Then I was asked by the Bush administration to work for them at USDA, first as the state director for Farm Service Agency in Maryland, and then I went to D.C. as the Deputy Administrator for Field Operations that oversees all the county and state offices across the country. And again, you go back to Farm Bureau, it was really invaluable in those jobs. After that, I did a stint of having a consulting business that did association management and some lobbying with a partner in Louisville, Kentucky. And then I had the opportunity to go back to MDA, doing some work on crop insurance education. Had the opportunity to become the Assistant Secretary for Marketing, Animal Industries, and Consumer Services. And then just most recently, I had the opportunity to become Deputy Secretary. And it's been a real honor working for the Hogan administration.
What do you think your future is 5-10 years from now? Where would you like to see? I mean, as your career has obviously progressed through the ranks, and very, very valuable in every step you've been in. But over the next 5 to 10 years, where would you like to see yourself be? Where do you think
Well, that's a
who would
good.
be working?
That's a great question, seeing as I'm an appointee, and my appointment may end January 18th. So I will be doing something. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be yet. I'm old. I've been around, as you could tell by me, speaking that I'm getting towards the end of my career. But my wife will not allow me to retire yet because she's not ready to retire, so I'm going to have to continue working. I hope to find something in ag policy, either regionally in the state of Maryland or maybe nationally. But
Definitely in the ag industry.
yeah, that's what I know. That's where my passion is, and frankly, I've been lucky. There's not a better industry to be in.
With all the things that you've done and seen, what are one of the challenges you saw throughout your entire career so far? Like one of the biggest challenges?
Well, the biggest challenge is, it's an opportunity and a challenge, really. I think that the misunderstanding about production agriculture by the general public, I think that we in the ag industry have done such a great job of providing consumers with affordable and safe, readily available food that we've made it easy for everybody. Most people are 2 or 3, 4 generations removed from production agriculture. They may think they know about production agriculture because they read a story in Atlantic, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions. And I'm really proud of our ag community, their work ethic and their adoption of new practices that will help to improve yields and better the environment.
What's one of the new practices that has started in Maryland that is now phasing into other counties, states, or even nations?
Well, I think one thing that we do in Maryland, and this has been going on for a couple decades, but we've had very high adoptions of conservation tillage practices. And it's really helped with the cleanup of Chesapeake Bay.
We're going to have listeners who are not going to know what that is. Can you explain what tillage practices are?
And that's another problem is sometimes we talk in our own language,
right.
lingo. Yeah. Well, I think that soil health has become one of those areas that policymakers are focusing on. And the more tillage, that means mechanically moving the soil around, the more impact you have on soil health. And I think that we have some of the highest percentage rates of producers using either no-till or reduced-till type practices that are vital for helping to improve soil health, along with other practices such as using cover crops to hold the soil and other nutrients when crops are dormant. I just think that we have our farmers are just early adopters, especially if a practice can be proven to make viable financial sense.
Would you say that's because we're so close to the Chesapeake Bay?
Well, I think that pushes some of our folks to adopt early technologies, and once they are proven to be successful, other folks will adopt them. And I think that's why we have one of the higher rates of that early adoption. In part is because of our proximity to the Chesapeake Bay. I think the closer you are to the Chesapeake Bay, the more practices that you're going to get enticed into using, as well as I think at MDA we have some programs that really encourage people through financial incentives to participate in some really practices that make good soil health and water quality sense.
Steve, what makes you so passionate about working for the Maryland agriculture industry? A lot of farmers, we work for ourselves. We can see the direct benefits of, busting your ass and seeing your hard work that you put in pay off. Working in a governmental position, you might not see the direct results of your hard work. So what keeps you so passionate? What keeps you motivated?
Well, I think part of it's just growing up in agriculture. You develop a passion for it or an affinity for it, or you just understand it, and it just it's I don't know. Some people grow up on a farm and want to get as far and fast as they away from it as fast as they can. Others, I think, are drawn to it. It's just where my interest lies, and I've actually been pretty lucky. My wife was very involved with agriculture. That's where we met, was here actually at Maryland Farm Bureau 27 years ago. And
Who's your wife? Can you tell us?
Huh?
Can you tell us who your wife is?
Oh, do you want to know who my wife is?
That in the background is
Well-
another member, Ryan Zimmerman, chiming up, asking Steve to maybe give us a little background on his wife.
Well, my wife's Valerie Connelly. She was longtime Director of Government Relations for Maryland Farm Bureau, and then became the Executive Director. She's recently moved on to a different position, working for a rural electric co-op. But we've always, we traveled with the Farm Bureau folks to the national conventions, always going to the state convention. It's just, luckily, we've developed these great friendships with a lot of people in Farm Bureau, and it's it's part of our social life.
It's a great ag family that has always stuck together fighting ag issues and, for the good people of agriculture. Through the MDA, with your employment, what are some of the challenges you face, have faced through the years, and also what are some of your most enjoyable parts of MDA?
Well, I think that I'll start with the most enjoyable parts, because there's a lot of stuff that's not enjoyable. But the quality of people that work at MDA is very high. Most people want to be there because the salaries at a state agency are not always competitive to the public. The private sector. People could probably make more money doing something else, but they're very. A lot of our employees work their entire career at MDA. Very dedicated, whether they're veterinarians or whether they're seed analysts or whether they're in our weights and measure shop or in the pesticide regulation section. They buy into the community and really appreciate it. Now, some of our challenges, at least in the last 8 years, I think number one has been the pandemic. It definitely had an impact on the workforce as well as the ag industry. We spent a lot of time trying to provide guidance to the agricultural community. Agriculture was deemed an essential job, and we wanted to make sure that our farmers could keep their farmers markets open. If they're going to have livestock auctions, people could continue to take livestock to auction. We provided a lot of guidance in that area. But the pandemic actually had a pretty big impact on the bottom line of some farming operations. Some farming operations actually made pretty good money during the pandemic if they were marketing directly to consumers, but others had some challenges. We ran 2 disaster programs that I think were helpful to farmers. We did a bonus program on a federal program called Coronavirus Food Assistance Program that I think helped some producers, especially folks in the dairy industry, who are seeing some pretty tough times to get some state support. And also a poultry program. During the pandemic, there were shortages of workers at one poultry facility specifically, and they were unable to process the birds, and the actual growers of those birds lost a substantial amount of money because their houses were empty for a good portion of the time. So we were able to give some relief to those folks. And also our dairy industry has been seeing some pretty tough times. We've lost 10 years ago, we probably had 550 dairy farms. We're down to about 300.
On question for that, have you seen an uptick in the amount of herd size with that, or is it just?
That's a great question. 20 years ago, we had a consistent number of cows in the state of Maryland, about 80,000 cows, but at the same time, we were having decreasing numbers of farmers. So somebody is picking those cows up. They're just expanding and making up for it. But that trend changed about 10 years ago. We have less cow numbers as well as less dairy farmers. Actually, we've had a couple new dairy farms start in parts of the state of Maryland, but they are very small dairy farms, 25, 30 cow dairy farms. And they're really, because we have an Amish community that's moving into parts of Cecil County, Washington County, that are, they, as part of their viability is they're having 25, 30 cows.
That's interesting to hear.
Yeah, we actually had the opportunity to visit Southern Maryland and our lead, part of our lead seminars. We're all part of the lead Maryland 12 class. And in Southern Maryland, some of the Amish dairy farms seem to be thriving because there's a big cheese industry that's been thriving down that way. So it's glad to hear some positive news about dairy for once. Seems like too often we're hearing the negative stuff. So over the past 8 years or so with the Hogan administration, could you tell us a little bit about your experience working with Hogan and working with the rest of the administration? What things that you thought they did well with agriculture, what things could have been improved? If you could just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think they did everything perfect.
Yeah.
Because I'm part of the team.
Yeah.
But I think when Governor Hogan was elected, some of us were surprised at how well he did. Not that we weren't hopeful, but a Republican governor in Maryland is always a challenge to get somebody elected. But I think that Governor Hogan has done a really good job of reaching out to the rural parts of the state where most of our agriculture is. And I think that he was rewarded by reaching out to the farm community. I know that he was endorsed by, I believe, every county farm bureau in the state through the PAC. I think that he wears that as a badge of honor. So I think that he was always had Farm Bureau had a place at the seat at the table so that they could bring issues that were important to them to our administration. I think that Governor Hogan's been very supportive of our agency and the ag community through several different initiatives. He's provided consistent funding for the Rural Maryland Council. I think it was at $3 million, and he's actually brought it up to $9 million this current year. Wow. He's been very supportive of organizations like Mark Bidco, which is kind of our joint venture lending program for agriculture and forestry, including programs like the Next Gen program, which assists new and beginning farmers to finance their first purchase of a farm, as well as ag land preservation. Over the 8 years that Governor Hogan was here, there's been $225 million spent on close to 55,000 acres that have been permanently preserved.
And that's just via the state programs, correct?
Just the state program.
Okay.
So he's actually put his money where his mouth is. And I know that he's willing to sit down and talk about ag issues anytime. And I think that he put together a pretty good team at MDA. I think we have people that are understand agriculture and want to see that that agriculture is viable and successful. That's the best ag land preservation program there is if the farmer's making money.
Yeah, I agree 100%. If farms aren't viable, then obviously they're gonna sell out. Could you talk a little bit more about working, I guess, directly under the different secretaries throughout your time at MDA?
Sure. Well, I was.
Because you worked under quite a few. haven't you?
I was actually at the beginning of my career. I've had two mentors that are very important to me. The first one was Jack Miller, former state senator. He was the lobbyist for Maryland Farm Bureau in my first job, and Jack he was pretty tough on me at times, but I learned a tremendous amount of work ethic, a tremendous amount of understanding how the legislative process work. And then I went, and then I worked for Wayne Cawley. He was the second Maryland Secretary of Agriculture. He was also pretty tough on me at times. And, when you're young, sometimes it's good to have a mentor that's going to tell you where you're making mistakes, but also back you up when you do. Just those two guys have a special place in my heart. It really helped me with my career by giving me some really tough love at times, but at the same time, knowing that they're there to support me. And I've worked for Secretary Lou Riley. He's just a prince of a man. He was awesome. I really enjoyed that. And then most recently, I've worked for Joe Bartenfelder from here on the shore. Joe's been he's a friend, and we work on issues and we're in agreement 90% of the time on things. And I've been very, very lucky in my career to work for some dynamite folks.
What are some things you think MDA can continue to work on to develop and better serve the ag community?
Well, as you're all aware, one of the number one issues that MDA's been focused on the last 25 years is cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay, helping the ag community meet its nutrient goal reductions for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. I think that we need to continue to provide those programs that either provide cost share for cover crop or manure transport to move manure to where it can be used from places where there's too much of it, to continue to help put facilities under our MAX program, the Maryland Ag Cost Share Program, and best management practices on the land. We need to continue to do that, but at the same time recognize that things change, and we need to be able to be a little bit nimble so that we can address new concerns or to recognize that the economy and agriculture is at times changing, and we have to. We want to get to practices on the land. We might have to make changes. And just an example of that is during the pandemic, two things happened. Cost went up because of supply chain problems for lumber, concrete, diesel fuel, things like that. So some of the facilities that we normally cost share on, those prices went up. So we have to go back and look at how we fund those projects. And number two, there are some projects that have a higher return on investment for reducing nutrients. So we went back, and there's some projects now that we'll pay 100% cost share on because they get such a big bang for the buck to help us as an agriculture community meet our target goals.
Can you give us an example of one of those?
Like manure storage structures. The old rate was farmer would have to pay 12.5% of the cost to do it, and now they will pay up to 100% of the actual cost.
So while we all know what that is, can you explain to the listeners what that is?
Well, that's Sure, sure. I'm glad you pulled me back there, JT, because I get my own little world here. Say you're a dairy farm, and you got 100 cows. Well, cows eat, and then they make manure, and you have to do some of that, something with that manure, because every farmer in the state of Maryland has to operate under a nutrient management plan. That means we are only putting down the right amount of nutrients for the crop at the right time. So we cost share on manure storage structures, so that you can collect the manure and keep it until the time that you need it. And so these structures are pretty darn expensive, and sometimes farmers didn't have the money to pay for the cost share, their percentage, so that they would put off getting the project on the ground. And by moving to 100% cost share, we hope to speed up the construction. That way we get more credit sooner to meet our goals.
And the reason for these manure storages is because there is a period of time during the year that farmers are not allowed to spread nutrients in goals to help save the Chesapeake Bay on frozen ground. Is that correct?
Well, actually, it's from December 15th through March 1st. Maryland farmers are prohibited from spreading manure, commercial fertilizer, can't put down lawn fertilizers, just no nutrients. Any fertilizer containing nitrogen or phosphorus cannot be land applied during that time period. And the major reason for that is the crop is not growing. It's dormant at that time. Therefore, we want to be able to make sure that whether it's a cover crop, and a cover crop is a crop that you plant to help hold the soil as well as to uptake those nutrients, it's not growing. Or if it's a small grain that's like winter wheat, you plant it in the fall and it grows during parts of the winter, but you when it goes dormant, it's not holding that, it's not taking up the two nutrients of concern, which is phosphorus and nitrogen. And nitrogen's water soluble. We get a lot of rain, a lot of water, a lot of snow, frozen ground in the winter, and you could lose that nitrogen. That's bad for the farmers, because then they'll have to replace it with nitrogen that they purchase, but we don't want it going into Chesapeake Bay either. So we have that. Our neighboring states don't, but we do have that time period with no fertilizer application.
Am I correct in remembering that, was it MDA or the state of Maryland was actually seeking legal action against our neighbors about that?
Wasn't MDA, it was the Maryland Department of Environment, but there is I believe, a lawsuit that's going on because there's concerns that the state of Pennsylvania may not, first off, to be fair to them, the Chesapeake Bay is not in their backyard, so they're not quite as aggressive as the state of Maryland is. But I think there's a feeling that maybe they're not meeting all the requirements of the Chesapeake Bay Agreement that the 5 states have signed and committed.
That's Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York,
and West Virginia.
Plus
the District of Columbia.
Okay.
If you had a big crystal ball, Steve, 10 to 20 years from now, the challenges for the future farmers of agriculture and areas of improvement that you think would be the main focus?
Well, I'm very bullish on the future of Maryland agriculture. I think that
As are we.
Yeah, I had to throw bull in there somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
we're all bullish.
My crystal ball is we're going to still have a strong poultry industry that's going to drive a lot of the row crop production in the state of Maryland. I do think there's going to be a lot more value-added type agriculture, whether it's small processors that are meeting niche market needs. I I think we'll probably have some increases in vegetable production if we can stay competitive with Georgia and Florida on things such as labor cost, land cost, the cost to meet the regulation requirements under the Food Safety Modernization Act, specifically the Produce Safety Rule. I think that we're going to have a lot more breweries and distilleries and wineries, and I think there's an opportunity for our commercial farms to take advantage of either supplying them or having them on their own location. I think that one thing that it's not bullish, but the horse industry is really strong in the state of Maryland. It's just a little tidbit. There are more horses in the state of Maryland than any other per acre than any other state in the country. A lot of people are surprised by that. But it's we're a small state, but we got a lot of horses.
So, with the new law passed for the consumption or use of marijuana, do you see the Maryland farmers being able to make out like how we used to with tobacco? Like this could be a new cash crop for Maryland farmers to be able to plant and be able to use and sell. And I realize there are certain laws federally still inhibiting this, but do you, in the future?
Well, I don't know that MDA is going to have a direct role in it, in the actual production and sale and consumption. Unless it becomes fully legal, then we can help on the marketing side.
I just didn't know, like, there's states like Colorado, like, if you guys have been looking at things that they did and be like, okay, this we don't want to do that, but maybe this.
Well, I believe there's an actual marijuana commission, and it's going to see it's. Even though it will become, I believe, legal in the next 10, 15 years, I still believe it's going to be highly regulated, similar to how alcohol was regulated. It'll probably be through the comptroller's office or some sort of board that is involved, specifically because it's going to be taxed. Okay. And I think that the whole idea of having some other structure is to make sure that they recover as much of the tax revenue as they possibly can.
Well, now, I mean, cigarettes are taxed.
Yeah, and it's going to be very similar to the cigarettes. We really did, we helped promote and regulated tobacco auctions when we had a strong tobacco industry, but we didn't.
I did not know that.
Huh?
I did not know that.
Yeah, we actually had the Maryland State Tobacco Authority. It's no longer in being, but we actually helped regulate the auction markets in Southern Maryland for tobacco, on which warehouse had sales on which date. We actually had employees that were there to make sure that there was fairness in the sale of tobacco by Maryland tobacco farmers. Oh. So I doubt that will come back for marijuana. Now we do have a actual part of the growing of hemp is under our regulations.
Okay.
We participate. We have the federal government through U.S. Department of Agriculture's. They regulate the growing of hemp, and we have there's two ways you can do it. A state can not take over and do a program and just allow producers to go through USDA to grow hemp, or you can have a state program. We have an accepted state program that has to follow the USDA guidelines on production to make sure that the hemp doesn't turn into marijuana, make sure that its THC levels are at a certain level. But we have to follow the USDA rules as well as what provisions are in the Farm Bill. There's going to be some loosening of that in the next negotiation of the Farm Bill, but we have to follow USDA rules.
All right, Steve, another question here. So most of us are young farmers here, and that's not very common throughout the state. I think the stat is most farms don't make it past the second or third generation. I'm personally sixth generation at my farm. JT?
We're like the the home farm. I'm technically the fourth generation, I think.
So both of us have already exceeded the, I guess, national average of passing down the farm. What improvements do you think need to be made between farmers and their next generation or the future generations? What practices in Maryland specifically, I guess, do you think the future generations need to be participating in?
And before you go on, to clarify, I think the average age, if I remember correctly, is 65 or 67 for the average age of a typical farmer.
Well, I think it's a little younger.
It's 59, right?
59, I
It's a
believe.
little younger.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, you-
Yeah. So can I just express a little bit of a pet peeve with that number? You know,
Go for it.
I understand why that number's used, and I maybe I'm just being contrarian here, but when I graduated from college in 1985, the average age was 56 and a half. So I think that age sometime is based upon how we count farmers, and we often count the principal operator. I know on the Miller farm, I'm pretty sure that if you average out the age of the Miller family that are working on the farm and making their living off the farm, I know your dad's probably 59 or so, right? And but you and your brother, but if you and your brothers that are working on the farm, if you divided all the Millers that worked on the farm, you might get a lower number. And I think that would be true with the Albright farm also.
Yes.
So I think that sometimes, I know it's a useful number, but maybe it's because I was an ag econ major. I like to dig a little bit deeper in the surface before I jump in. One of the challenges, I think, for Maryland agriculture of moving the business to the next generation is a lot of farmers are farmers because they're independent in nature. They want to be independent. They may run the farm as a sole proprietorship. I think really moving the asset class on a farm, whether it's the livestock or the real estate, is a challenge unless you go through a good estate planning process to plan your future. And a lot of farmers don't really see that their time's going to ever end. Yeah, I just know I from the folks I know, they get to 60, when they're 30, they're saying, well, at 60, I'm going to turn it all over to my kids. Well, they get to 60 and they're not quite ready to do that because you guys are young and you really don't know what you're doing. And that's sometimes, I don't know if that ever happens to you.
Oh, I've never been told that.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that organizations like Maryland Farm Bureau, University of Maryland Ag Law Center, Extension Service have done a really good job of making people aware of what tools are out there for transferring to the next generation. And a lot of people have really good intentions, but sometimes don't pull the trigger. Because I've known of more than one farm family that have an estate plan, think they have it all planned out, but they have. This is how I usually see it. You have a farm, you have 3 kids, you have one kid that really wants to stay on the farm and work the farm. The other 2 go get jobs off the farm. But when it comes time when somebody dies, one of the parents die, everybody wants a little piece of the assets that are left, and it makes it difficult for that person that stayed on the farm to buy out everybody else, because it just, your assets appreciate over time. It's like so it's a challenge. So good estate planning is the key, and sometimes during estate planning you got to make some tough decisions. The parents have to make some tough decisions on how the farm's going to get transferred, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems. It's uncomfortable for the farmer to pick how they're going to have their assets divvied up without hurting some of their children's feelings.
I'm going to go back to my crystal ball question, Steve. But let's not look in the future. Let's explain to our listeners some of the significant changes from where agriculture was 20 to 30 years ago in the state of Maryland. I mean, we've touched on, how we've always been trying to clean up the bay and the conservation programs, but some of the other significant changes that have the past 20 to 30 years, how far agriculture in Maryland has grown leaps and bounds.
Well, we don't produce any tobacco or very little bit of tobacco in Maryland today. And actually, my home county in Cecil County we've got some new dairy farms, but we also got some more tobacco acres, mostly because of the Amish moving in. Say your question again. You lost me there.
20 to 30 years ago, there was, agriculture in Maryland has changed so much. What are some of the most significant changes?
Well, I think number one is we've become much more efficient in our uses of crop protectants and nutrients. We've become much more efficient in our yields, whether it's dairy or in the poultry industry. Our yields of crops, the adoption of technologies such as traits being put into our seeds and soybeans and corn that have really increased our yields. When I was, right out of college, I think the state average for corn production was right around 110 bushels to the acre. I think now it's like 190 to 200 bushels to the acre. And a lot of that is because of the genetics that are now in our corn seed and how we approach growing that corn has really helped increase the yields. Soybeans have very similar history. A lot of money has been put into improving yields in soybeans. I think they get about 3/4 of a bushel a year increase on average because of the improved genetics. Our dairy herds, when I graduated from college, I think we were probably 15,000 pounds of milk a year per cow, and I think we're about 22,000 pounds per cow now. So it's just, I think that the science has really been adopted.
So last question for you. I'm going to toss this one out. Do you have any questions you would like to ask us or any final parting words as we wrap it up here?
Well, yeah, I want to know why you guys are so excited about being in agriculture. You're young guys, and I know Adam has a family, and I know Matt has a family. I don't know if you're married or not.
I am not married yet.
Yeah, so I didn't think you were, but if you have a family, it can be scary at times because you got to be able to make a living, and it's easier if you're single. But if you got a family, you want to make sure that you do the right thing for the rest of your family. So why are you in agriculture?
Well, yeah, Steve. Yes, when we talk about family, and I come at it from two different angles. With the dairy, milk and dairy cows on one side, and the row crop production on the other side. And you were just touching on the efficiency. We want to be able to provide better for our family. There's no better place to raise a family than on the farm.
Amen.
It's a great teaching opportunity for your children, and when it comes back to the efficiency, we want to be able to provide the safest product, which I believe Maryland farmers rank right up there with everyone else in the United States. The safest product in the world as far as nutrition goes, and as farmers, we don't want to spend any more money than we have to grow that product. So we down to the molecular level use science for the genetics to plant the best seeds, to manage the weeds, to help that product grow to the best of its ability so we can harvest the most bushels possible. And the same on the dairy industry. We want them cows to give more milk so we can provide a wholesome product in the stores to to the families, just the same as Adam does with his produce and JT with his produce and turkeys. We want to be able to reduce our inputs efficiently, have the cows eat their food, and produce more pounds of milk, so we can continue to raise our families on our farms in the state of Maryland, which I think we can all agree here it's one of the best states to live in. JT?
For me, it's I would say in college I had an epiphany that growing up on a farm is a different lifestyle. And as you go away to college, it's usually when you see and you realize that, maybe that's when you grow as a person typically. And while I was out there, I really went to school to study landscape architecture. And while I was out there, the economy kind of took a crash because of the housing bubble. And I came back and started working on the farm. And one of the driving reasons I really went out to be a landscape architect was really to help stop seeing the development of farms. That was one of my motivators that I really never told anybody about. But what brought me back to the farm was partially finances, and partially I realized that I can do more within the farm community helping that. And I was a young man, and I realized that, that lifestyle that I grew up enjoying, I'm not going to find it, in a development. I'm not going to find it. I like, and this is going to sound bad, but I like sometimes just waking up and walking outside and seeing nature. Like I can go out and see cows, and I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about my neighbor's lawnmower running at 9 o'clock at night or whatever. It's the little things like that, and I get that some people enjoy that. I didn't grow up that way, and I didn't grow up learning to enjoy that. So I learned to grow up enjoying, the smell of manure, the smell of silage.
Smell of money.
Yeah, exactly. So
There's nothing better than the smell of silage.
that is one of my favorite smells in the world. Adam?
Yeah, so like you, JT, in college I kind of had a little epiphany myself. Freshman year I went to UNC Greensboro actually doing entrepreneurship. And, growing up, there was some afternoons after school I would have to go out in the fields, help plant some good old kale and collard greens and all that good stuff. And my friends are home playing Xbox and PlayStation and eating snacks and stuff. And nothing wrong with that, I guess. But at the time when you're 10 or 12 years old, it's a little frustrating. So my early childhood, kind of got annoyed by the whole farm life. High school, same kind of thing. But it wasn't until like freshman year of college I had a bit of epiphany. Like, you know what? We had just recently lost an uncle of ours that was involved in the family business. Passed away of cancer, pretty young age. And my brother had come back to the farm. Wasn't, I don't think, his plans coming out of college. But he did it. There was a void that needed to be filled with my uncle passing. And I saw that opportunity there. As far as my family goes, my brother and I are kind of the only ones from the younger generation that have taken a financial interest. Sounds like my sister might be coming back to the farm too. But yeah. In Prince George's County, we are one of the last remaining farms, and that was in the back of my mind too. So all this is going on freshman in college. I ended up transferring to the University of Maryland, studying horticulture and crop production, and here we are today. Wouldn't change it for the world. Been working at the farm full time now ever since graduated college. Worked there growing up, of course, during summers, but yeah, we've grown quite a bit over the years, and I think there's still a big future ahead of us, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's really kind of emotionally fulfilling to be, at the end of the day, I think, being on the farm and actually feeling like you've completed something and you've, provided food for other people.
So, closing notes. Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, just want to thank you for allowing me to ramble on with all of my thoughts, and it's been fun, and I wish the podcast a lot of success in the future. So thank you.
You've been a wealth of knowledge, Steve, and you always have been. And keep up the good fight. You've always been a strong supporter of the ag and Lead Maryland and MAFE and Maryland Farm Bureau, and we all appreciate it. And
We'll have you back for another.
we'll have you back on in 6-8 months.
Well-
Maybe we'll see where we're at then. Maybe.
Smoke a cigar.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to the cigar, and and frankly, this was a bull in the barn. Mine might have been bull something else. So
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for your time, Steve. I am
welcome.
single, by the way. My brother is the one that has the family.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all
I was
good.
giving you a wife and everything. Kids
Yeah, it's all
already.
good.
I'm
It's all
sorry.
good.
It's-
Well, that wraps it for us guys today. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Look forward to the next one. Coming soon.